"Daddy, why is that lady crying while she smiles?" Nia's voice was small, honest, the kind of honest only a 7-year-old could get away with. Malcolm Hayes had been reaching for the syrup when her question stopped his hand midair. For a second, he didn't even turn around. He just sat there in the dull Friday night hum of the diner, with the clink of forks, the low murmur of tired people, and the smell of burnt coffee hanging in the air like something that had been there too long. Then he looked, and just like that, the room lost its sound. Danielle Brooks stood 3 booths away in a faded cream waitress uniform, a black order pad pressed against her palm, her smile pinned carefully into place for a customer who wasn't even looking at her. She had one of those smiles people wear when life has asked too much of them for too long. It was polite. It was practiced. It didn't reach her eyes. Malcolm felt something old and buried shift hard in his chest. Not anger. Not even shock at first. Just that strange, hollow drop a man feels when the past stops being memory and starts breathing right in front of him. Danielle, his ex-wife. The woman who had once danced barefoot with him in a studio apartment with cracked tile and no air conditioning. The woman who used to steal fries off his plate and laugh like she had all the time in the world. The woman who had walked out 6 years ago with tears in her eyes and pride in her spine and never once looked back. Nia leaned closer to him, whispering now like she understood that something sacred had entered the room. "Do you know her?" Malcolm swallowed before answering. "Yeah," he said softly. "I used to. But even that didn't feel true. Used to know her. Used to love her. Used to build a life around the sound of her footsteps coming down a hallway. None of it fit the woman standing under flickering diner lights, writing down an order for meatloaf and sweet tea like the whole world hadn't just tilted under his feet. Danielle turned then. Maybe because she felt his eyes on her. Maybe because some part of the heart remembers before the mind does. Her gaze landed on Malcolm, and the color left her face so. Quietly, it was almost graceful. The pen in her hand paused. The smile vanished. The whole diner seemed to hold its breath with her. She knew him instantly. He could tell. Not from drama. Not from some big reaction. But from the way her shoulders stiffened, then lowered, like the strength had gone out of them all at once. She looked at Nia, then back at him, and something flickered through her eyes so fast it nearly escaped him. Shame, maybe. Or grief. Or recognition too deep for either word. Malcolm looked away first. Not because he was weak. Because dignity sometimes looks like restraint. His daughter was still sitting across from him in a little denim jacket with a missing button, coloring on the back of a kid's menu with red crayon. The world had not stopped for her. It never does for children. Nia looked back toward Danielle, still curious. "She looks sad," she whispered. Malcolm folded his napkin once, then again, buying himself a second he did not have. "Sometimes grown-ups smile when they're trying to make it through the day," he said. Nia accepted that answer the way children accept rain or winter or bedtime. Simple things can still be true. Across the room, a man at booth 12 lifted his coffee mug and complained that it had gone cold. Danielle moved toward him immediately, apologizing in that calm, careful voice Malcolm remembered from harder years. But it was thinner now, softer in the wrong places. He noticed things he wished he hadn't. The worn edge of her apron, the tired bend in her posture by the end of each step, the way she held the tray with one hand and her left wrist with the other for half a second when no one was watching. Life had touched her. Not loudly, not all at once, but enough. Malcolm had spent years telling himself she had probably landed somewhere better. Somewhere clean. Somewhere far from the kind of strain that makes people flinch at bills and count hours and tips. He used to imagine her in a neat apartment with bright windows, maybe working reception at a dentist's office, maybe laughing again, maybe finally happy without him. But this was something else. This was survival in sensible shoes. This was grace stretched thin. And somehow that hurt worse than if she had been angry, or thriving, or entirely indifferent. The Waitress station bell rang sharp in the silence between his thoughts. Danielle picked up 2 plates, turned too quickly, and almost lost her balance before catching herself. It happened fast, barely noticeable, but Malcolm noticed. He always noticed the small things about her. That had been the beginning of them once. And maybe, he realized as Nia pushed her crayons into a crooked little pile and the neon open sign buzzed against the dark window. Maybe that was the problem now. He still did. Danielle did not come back to their table right away. She moved through the diner like someone trying not to break in public, one hand balancing plates, the other smoothing over moments no one else would remember by morning. But Malcolm remembered everything. He remembered the way she used to tuck loose hair behind her ear when she was nervous. The way she would straighten a stack of bills on the counter when money was tight, as if neatness could make numbers less cruel. The way silence always found her first before tears ever did. Across the room, she set down 2 burgers, refilled a cup, nodded at a tired truck driver, and wrote something on a check with a smile that looked a little too careful. Then she disappeared through the swinging door near the kitchen. Nia looked up from her coloring sheet and frowned. Is she coming back? Malcolm reached for his water glass, though he was not thirsty. Probably, he said. She is working. Nia studied him for a second with that unsettling little child seriousness that made him think too often of how much she noticed. You look like when Grandma called about the hospital. Malcolm let out a breath through his nose. Almost a laugh, except nothing in him felt light enough for that. I do not think I look that bad. You do, she said, very gently, then went back to coloring the edge of a cartoon pancake purple. The bell above the front door jingled as 2 college kids walked in from the cold, carrying the sharp smell of night air with them. Outside, rain had started tapping softly against the glass, turning the parking lot lights into smears of gold. It made the whole diner feel smaller, warmer, and somehow harder to leave. Malcolm had only brought Nia in because he was too tired to cook after his second shift. The plan had been simple. Grilled cheese for her. Meatloaf special for him. 40 minutes, maybe 50. Then home to their apartment on the south side, where the heat worked only when it felt generous and Nia still liked to leave her tiny backpack hanging on the kitchen chair like she was getting ready for school all over again. But now time had changed shape. Now every second felt like it had a pulse. The kitchen door pushed open again, and Danielle stepped back onto the floor carrying a fresh pot of coffee. Her eyes found Malcolm before she could stop them. It was only for a moment, but it was enough. She looked away so fast it almost seemed rude, except Malcolm saw what was underneath it. Fear. Not fear of him. Fear of being seen by him. There was a difference, and it mattered. A man in a business suit near the register snapped his fingers lightly for a refill. Danielle crossed to him at once. Polite. Efficient. Invisible in the way service workers are expected to be invisible. Malcolm felt something tighten low in his chest. Danielle had never been loud, but she had never been small either. Back when they were 24 and trying to build a marriage out of discount groceries and stubborn hope, she used to stand with both feet planted, chin up, even when the world gave her every reason to fold. She had worked the front desk at a dental office then. Pressed uniforms. Hoop earrings. Lip gloss in her purse. She used to come home and kick off her shoes at the door like she was outrunning the whole day. He could still hear her laughing from the kitchen of that tiny apartment, asking if he wanted hot sauce on his eggs, telling him he needed better music in his life, telling him they would get through this part because this part was not forever. He had believed her. Maybe that was what stung now. Not just that life had changed her. That life had been strong enough to prove her wrong. Nia slid out of the booth just enough to peer around him. Daddy, she whispered. I think she knows us. Malcolm looked down at her. Yeah, he said after a beat. She does. From church? Nia asked. No, from work. No, Nia considered that carefully, then asked the question children always arrive at faster than adults are ready for. Then from where? Malcolm opened his mouth, but nothing came out right away. He watched Danielle at the counter, heard the hiss of the grill, the scrape of forks against plates, the tired country song floating low through the ceiling speakers. The whole room kept moving, indifferent and ordinary. That was the strangest part. A man could find the ghost of his old life standing 10 feet away, and the coffee would still pour, the cash register would still ring, somebody would still ask for more ketchup. Finally he said, from a long time ago. Nia accepted that, but only halfway. Was she your friend? Malcolm looked back at Danielle, just as she bent to pick up a dropped spoon near the pie case. For one brief second, the overhead light caught the side of her face, and he saw how tired she really was. Not messy, not ruined, just worn in places no one had earned the right to comment on. He thought about saying yes, friend. He thought about choosing the easier word. But some lies are too thin to carry real weight. She was family once, he said quietly. Nia's crayon stopped moving. Once. Malcolm nodded. Once. And somehow that one word left more silence on the table than any speech could have. Danielle came to their table 3 minutes later with a coffee pot in one hand and a face she had clearly tried to put back together in the kitchen. Up close, the years were easier to read. Not because she looked older, because she looked careful, like life had taught her to keep every feeling folded small enough to fit behind her teeth. "Can I warm that up for you?" she asked, looking at Malcolm's half-full cup instead of his face. Her voice was steady, but only in the way a bridge is steady when it has been carrying too much weight for too long. Malcolm slid the mug forward without speaking. Danielle poured slowly, eyes on the dark stream, shoulders drawn in just a little. Nia watched her with open curiosity, chin propped on both hands. Children always knew when adults were acting around the truth. "Thank you," Malcolm said at last. 2 plain words. Nothing sharp in them. Nothing soft either. Danielle nodded once. "You are welcome." Then her eyes dropped to the coloring page in front of Nia. A pancake with purple edges. A syrup bottle colored green. Something in Danielle's expression shifted, not into a smile exactly, but into the memory of one. "That is pretty," she told Nia. "Pancakes can be purple if you want them to be." Nia brightened immediately. "I know. My teacher says art does not have to match real life." Danielle gave the smallest breath of a laugh. It lasted less than a second, but Malcolm heard it. Heard the echo of a woman who used to hum, while folding towels, and sing the wrong words to old songs on purpose just to make him laugh. "Your teacher sounds smart," Danielle said. "She is," Nia replied. Then, because children walk straight through doors adults spend years circling, she added, "Daddy said you were family once." Malcolm felt the air change. Not loudly. No plates dropped. No gasps. Just a stillness, subtle and immediate, as if the booth itself had drawn a breath. Danielle's fingers tightened around the coffee pot handle. Her eyes lifted to Malcolm then, really lifted, and what passed through them was too layered to name in one glance. Hurt, surprise, gratitude, maybe, though that seemed almost unfair. He had not said it to be kind. He had said it because it was true, and truth had a way of sounding tender when loss was still sitting inside it. Danielle set the pot down on the edge of the table, so carefully you would have thought it might shatter from one wrong move. She looked at Nia first. "Your daddy was right," she said quietly. "A long time ago I was." Nia nodded as if this cleared up everything. Then she pushed her cup toward Danielle. "Can I have more hot chocolate?" Danielle blinked, and something about the ordinary sweetness of the request seemed to steady her. "Of course, baby." She caught herself right after saying it. Baby. The old word had slipped out before permission could stop it. Her mouth parted slightly, like she might take it back, but Nia had already smiled. "Nobody calls me baby except Grandma." Danielle swallowed. "Then I am honored to be in very good company." She took the mug and headed toward the counter, moving carefully, but not as quickly as before. Malcolm watched her fill it at the machine near the pie display. There had been a time when he knew every small rhythm of her body. Which shoulder tensed first when she was upset. How she pressed her lips together when holding back words that wanted to come out sideways. How she got quiet, not cold, just quiet, when something hurt too close to the bone. He had learned all of that before he learned how little love could protect you from timing, money, grief, and pride. Back then, they had been 26 and running on faith. He worked maintenance at a public school during the day and drove for a delivery app at night. Danielle kept color-coded lists on the fridge. Rent, groceries, utilities, hope. They would laugh over ramen like it was a joke they were beating together. On good nights, they ate dinner on the floor because they had not bought a kitchen table yet. On bad nights, they promised each other the bad nights were temporary. Then came the winter that seemed to last a year. Hospital visits, missed shifts, bills arriving in thick white envelopes with red print that looked angry before you even opened them. A quiet apartment. A quieter marriage. People always think endings happen with one big moment. They do not. Sometimes they happen inch by inch, with tired mouths and misunderstood silence and grief too private to translate. Danielle returned with the hot chocolate, setting it in front of Nia with a napkin tucked neatly underneath. "Careful," she said. "It is hot." "Thank you," Nia chirped. Then she leaned in and whispered, not quietly enough, "I like her." Malcolm almost smiled despite himself. Danielle heard it too. Her eyes met his for one fragile second, and there it was again, that look people get when they stand in the doorway of a life they once lived and realize the lights are still on inside. Before either of them could say more, A voice cut in from behind the register. Danielle, booth 6 needs ranch, and table 9 is still waiting on pie. The manager did not sound cruel, just brisk, tired in his own way. Still, Malcolm saw what it did to her. The way she straightened too fast. The way apology rose to her face before she had even done anything wrong. Coming, she called. Then to Nia, softer, enjoy your cocoa. She picked up the coffee pot and turned away, but not before Malcolm noticed the name tag pinned to her apron. Not Danny, the way she used to write it when she felt playful. Not Mrs. Hayes, the way it once looked on the lease and the checking account and the cheap little mailbox downstairs. Just Danielle. Clean. Plain. Singular. As if life had stripped her down to the name she was born with and left her there to start over alone. Malcolm should have left then, paid the check, zipped Nia into her little pink raincoat, and stepped back into the wet Nashville night before memory had a chance to start asking for things. That would have been the clean version, the sensible version. But life had never once asked him whether he preferred clean. Nia was halfway through her hot chocolate now, a soft mustache of whipped cream on her lip, her eyelids beginning to lower the way they always did after 8:30. Malcolm checked the old clock above the pie case. 8:37. Rain threaded down the front windows in silver lines, and every time the door opened, a draft slid through the diner carrying the cold smell of pavement and gas station lights. Booth 6 laughed too loudly at something one of them had said. A couple near the register argued quietly over the bill. Ordinary sounds. Safe sounds. The kind that let a person pretend his chest was not tightening every time Danielle crossed his line of sight. She was moving faster now, but not better. Malcolm noticed the details other people skipped. The way she favored her right foot after a turn. The way she pressed a hand low against her ribs when she thought no one was watching. The way tiredness had settled into her posture like it paid rent there. Then it happened. Not something dramatic. Not the kind of moment that makes a whole room stop. Just one of those small humiliations life slips in when a person is already carrying too much. Danielle came out of the kitchen balancing 3 plates along her arm. A man near the aisle pushed his chair back without looking, clipping her path just enough for her to stumble. She caught the plates before they fell. Nothing crashed. Nothing broke. But one small bowl of coleslaw tipped over the rim and splashed down the front of her apron and shoe. The man, barely noticed, mumbled a distracted sorry about that, then went back to his phone. Danielle froze for half a second with that expression people wear when embarrassment lands before pain does. Then she bent, grabbed a stack of napkins from the service station, and started cleaning the floor before the customer could even move his feet. Malcolm felt heat rise under his collar. Not rage. Something quieter and older than that. The ache of watching someone you once loved become too practiced at shrinking herself. Nia looked up from her cup. "Daddy," she whispered. "She needs help." Malcolm was already reaching for his wallet. He stood, crossed to the register, and pulled out 2 20s with the same steady face he used when rent came due and the numbers still looked wrong. The cashier, a teenage boy with tired eyes and acne along his jaw, blinked up at him. "Can I help you, sir?" Malcolm nodded toward the 3 booths in Danielle's section. "I want to cover checks for 6, 8, and 9. The boy frowned. "All of them. All of them. You know them?" "No." Malcolm set the bills on the counter and added another 10. "And put this in her tip jar if she has one." The boy glanced toward Danielle, then back at Malcolm with that quick look people give when they realize kindness is happening for no obvious reason. "You sure?" Malcolm's voice stayed low. "Yeah." He did not explain that sometimes helping someone quietly is the only way to help them without taking the last thing they have left. Pride. The cashier rang it through, stapled receipts, and tucked the extra cash beneath the register. "I will tell them it has been handled," he said. Malcolm gave one short nod and returned to the booth as if nothing had happened. Nia watched him slide back into his seat. "Did you do something?" she asked. "Just paid our bill," he said. It was not the whole truth, but it was close enough for a child. Across the room, the customers at 6 and 8 looked surprised when the cashier waved off their checks. One woman asked twice if there had been a mistake. The teenage boy only pointed casually toward the register and said it had been taken care of. No names. No spectacle. Just done. Danielle came up a minute later to clear booth 9, still wearing the stain on her apron, though she had wiped the worst of it away. The man at the table told her his pie was excellent, and his bill had somehow disappeared. She looked confused, then suspicious, then quietly unsettled in the way people get when grace arrives without warning. Her gaze lifted almost against her will and landed on Malcolm. He did not smile. He did not nod. He just sat there with one hand around his water glass and the other resting near Nia's crayons, giving her the dignity of not being called out in the middle of a room full of strangers. That was when her expression changed. Not into relief. Relief is easy. This was something deeper. Something more dangerous. The look of a person remembering what gentleness used to feel like. Danielle finished clearing the plates, carried them back toward the kitchen, then stopped just short of the swinging door. She turned, came back. Her steps were slow, measured, like she was approaching not a booth but a memory she had not prepared to survive. "You did not have to do that," she said softly when she reached the table. Malcolm looked up at her. Rain streaked the window behind him. The diner lights hummed. Nia had fallen quiet, sensing the room inside the room again. "I know," he said. Danielle pressed her lips together. "Then why?" There it was. Not accusation. Not even curiosity, really. More like disbelief wrapped in exhaustion. Malcolm glanced down at the napkin holder, then at the stains still darkening the front of her apron. "Because embarrassment is heavy," he said. And I remembered. For a second, Danielle did not move at all. The sounds of the diner seemed to pull farther away, thinning out until all that remained between them was that one sentence and everything it had carried. He remembered. The winter they got their first shutoff notice. The way she had stood in the laundromat pretending not to cry because she was $53 short and too proud to call her mother. The time she had dropped a grocery bag in the parking lot and scrambled to pick up rolling cans before anybody noticed. He had remembered then too. He had always remembered. Danielle looked down, and when she lifted her face again, the careful expression was gone. Not broken, just honest now. "Malcolm," she said. So quietly it felt like the first time she had spoken his name in another lifetime. Then a voice from the kitchen called for her, sharp with dinner rush impatience, and whatever else might have come next stayed unfinished in the space between them. The kitchen voice called again, and Danielle flinched like someone waking up in the middle of a dream she had no right to be having. "Coming," she answered, but the word came out thin. She looked at Malcolm one last second, as if she wanted to say something larger than the room could safely hold, then turned and disappeared through the swinging door. The white panel flapped once behind her and settled. Just like that, she was gone again. Nia let out a breath she had apparently been holding. "She looks like she is trying not to cry," she said. Malcolm rubbed his thumb along the rim of his water glass. "Yeah," he said quietly. "Maybe." Nia studied him with her solemn little face, the one that made her seem older than 7 whenever she was noticing pain in a room. "Are you trying not to cry too?" Malcolm almost smiled at that, though it came out crooked. "No, baby girl." "A little," she pressed. He glanced at her, and there it was again, that strange ache of being seen by a child who still believed truth should fit in one sentence. "A little," he admitted. Nia nodded as if honesty had solved something. Then she slid across the booth and curled against his side, warm and drowsy, smelling like cocoa and rain-damp cotton. Malcolm draped an arm around her shoulders automatically. Outside, the weather had deepened. The rain was steadier now, tapping harder on the windows, gathering in silver streams beneath the neon sign. He looked toward the kitchen door without meaning to. 6 years was a long time to imagine someone one way. Long enough to file them into a cleaner version of memory. Long enough to turn a real person into a lesson, or a wound, or a chapter you kept telling yourself had closed. But Danielle was not closed. She was not tidy. She was flesh and fatigue and a stained apron and tired eyes and a voice that still knew how to say his name like it belonged somewhere. That was the danger of seeing someone again. Not the drama of it. The detail. The proof. The way reality comes back with scuffed shoes and trembling hands and makes all your old conclusions feel lazy. The cashier brought over the check folder a moment later, already stamped paid. Malcolm slipped a few more bills inside anyway. Nia looked up. "But you already paid." "I know." "Then why more?" Malcolm closed the folder and set it near the edge of the table. "Because sometimes people work hard and still go home tired." Nia considered that with the seriousness of a person trying to build a moral code before bedtime. "Like you." He looked down at her. "Yeah," he said. "Like me." She rested her head against him again. "Then somebody should leave you extra too." That landed somewhere deep. Not because it was profound, because it was simple. Because children still believed kindness should travel in both directions. Malcolm kissed the top of her head and stared at the rain. Across the diner, the dinner rush had thinned into the slower rhythm of late evening. A cook laughed somewhere in the back. The man in the business suit was gone. Booth 6 had emptied, leaving ketchup rings and a crumpled napkin behind. A young couple by the window sat shoulder to shoulder, sharing a slice of pie with the quiet happiness of people who still thought the future was mostly obedient. Malcolm remembered a night years ago when he and Danielle had done the same thing at a place not far from here. Lemon pie. 1 fork. $20 left and checking. She had looked at him over the table and said, "We are going to make it, Malcolm. I know we are." He had believed her because back then belief was easier than math. He had not known that love could be true and still not be enough to keep two tired people from drifting in opposite directions. He had not known how expensive grief could get when it moved into a marriage and refused to pay rent. The kitchen door pushed open again. Danielle stepped out carrying a trash bag and glanced around as if checking whether anyone needed anything before close. Her eyes landed on their booth and held there. Nia was half asleep now, cheek against Malcolm's arm, one small hand still wrapped around a purple crayon. Malcolm did not wave. Danielle did not smile. But something softened in her face at the sight of him holding their daughter that way. Not romance. Not nostalgia exactly. Something quieter. Recognition, maybe, of who he had become. Of who he had always been underneath the bills and silence and broken timing. She looked down at Nia's empty hot chocolate mug, then at the folded check with extra cash still tucked inside. Her throat moved once. She set the trash bag by the service station and walked toward them slowly, almost carefully, as if each step needed permission. When she reached the booth, her voice was low enough not to wake the child. "My shift ends in 15 minutes, she said. Malcolm looked up. Danielle kept her hands clasped in front of her apron, like if she let them hang loose they might betray too much. "There is an alley by the side door," she went on, eyes dropping for a second before rising back to his. "If you can wait." She did not say for what. She did not have to. Some sentences carry their own weather. Malcolm glanced at Nia, then back at Danielle. In the fluorescent hush of that old diner, with rain slipping down the glass and the past standing quietly in a stained uniform, he realized the night was no longer about surprise. It was about whether two people could finally bear to tell the truth in the same place. "We will wait," he said. Danielle closed her eyes for the briefest moment, like those 3 words had taken some weight off bones already near their limit. Then she nodded once and stepped back, carrying herself toward the final 15 minutes of her shift with a little less collapse in her shoulders than before. Malcolm watched her go and understood something he had not expected to understand tonight. Sometimes the first miracle is not love coming back. Sometimes it is simply this: the door opening. By the time the diner doors finally unlocked for the last customers leaving, the rain had thinned into a fine mist that clung to the streetlights and made the whole block look blurred around the edges. Malcolm carried Nia out asleep against his shoulder, her small arms loose around his neck, her purple crayon still tucked in the pocket of her denim jacket, like she had meant to save it for tomorrow. He settled her carefully into the back seat of his old sedan, pulled the blanket from under the passenger seat, and draped it over her legs with the kind of care that had long ago become second nature. She stirred only enough to murmur something about pancakes, then drifted deeper. Malcolm closed the door softly and stood for a second under the awning, listening to the low tick of cooling engines, the distant hiss of tires on wet pavement, the muted clatter of dishes still being stacked inside. The alley beside the diner was narrow and clean in the way working places sometimes are after the rush has stripped them down to their real shape. A dumpster stood near the brick wall. A single yellow security light buzzed overhead. The back door had a metal push bar with paint worn thin around the edges from years of tired hands. Malcolm shoved both hands into his jacket pockets and waited. He had done a lot of waiting in his life. Waiting at hospitals. Waiting outside school offices. Waiting on direct deposits that hit late and apologies that never came. But this felt different. This felt less like waiting for an answer and more like standing still long enough for the past to catch up. The door opened 8 minutes later. Danielle stepped out with a small paper bag in one hand and a worn cardigan folded over her arm. Without the apron, she somehow looked more fragile and more herself at the same time. Her hair had loosened around her face. The fluorescent light from inside traced tired shadows under her eyes before the door swung shut behind her and left them in the softer yellow glow of the alley light. For a second, neither of them spoke. Danielle looked toward the car first, saw Nia sleeping in the back seat, and her whole face changed in a way Malcolm was not ready for. It did not collapse. It softened. "She is beautiful," Danielle said, almost to herself. Malcolm glanced back through the window. "Yeah," he said. "She is." Danielle nodded as if that confirmed something she had already felt. Then she held up the paper bag a little. "The cook made an extra slice of apple pie and told me to take it home. I do not really have room in my fridge for kindness right now, so." Her mouth tilted in something close to humor. "I thought maybe she would want it tomorrow." Malcolm looked at the bag, then at her. "She will." Danielle handed it over, careful not to brush his hand more than necessary, though the restraint in that gesture said as much as contact ever could. "Thank you for waiting," she said. "I almost thought you might leave." Malcolm tucked the pie bag under his arm. "I said we would wait." Danielle let out a slow breath and leaned back against the brick wall, cardigan still folded in her arm like she had forgotten to put it on. In the quiet, the city sounded far away. A siren somewhere downtown. Music leaking from a bar 2 blocks over. The soft metallic ping of cooling rainwater dripping from the fire escape above them. "I did not know if you would want to talk to me," she said at last. Malcolm kept his voice even. "I did not know either." She gave a small nod like she respected that answer more than a kinder one. "That sounds fair." Another pause. "Not empty. Careful." Danielle looked down at her shoes, then at the wet concrete. "I almost walked out when I saw you." Malcolm did not move. "Why did you not?" She smiled without happiness. "Because I have spent 6 years running out of rooms at the exact wrong moment, and it has not made anything better." That landed between them with the weight of a confession and the plainness of fact. Malcolm looked at her fully then. No waitress uniform now. No crowd. No hot plates or register bells or customers needing things from her every 30 seconds. Just Danielle in a dark green blouse gone soft from too many wash cycles, standing under a weak alley light with her pride held together by almost nothing and still somehow standing. "You could have called," he said. He did not raise his voice. Did not accuse. He only placed the truth where it belonged. Danielle closed her eyes briefly, then opened them again. "I know. You could have written. I know. You could have told me where you went." She swallowed. "I know." Malcolm looked away toward the street because sometimes a man needs 1 second to set his jaw before he trusts his own calm. "Then why didn't you?" Danielle pulled the cardigan tighter against herself without putting it on. The night air had turned cooler. Or maybe the question had. "Because I was ashamed," she said. There it was. No decoration around it. No excuse dressed up as reason. Just the word itself. Ashamed. Malcolm had expected anger if they ever had this conversation. Or blame. Or some old version of the fight that broke them open in the first place. He had not expected shame. Danielle kept going. Her voice low, steady only because she was holding it there with both hands. "I kept telling myself I would reach out when I got stable. When I had a real place. When I looked less like a cautionary tale. When I could explain everything in a way that did not make me sound weak or cruel or lost." She laughed softly once, and the sound had no light in it. "Turns out life does not clean itself up just because you are embarrassed by the mess." Malcolm said nothing. He let the silence do what silence sometimes does best. "Make room." Danielle looked toward the car again, through the rain-dotted glass at the sleeping child in the back seat. "When I saw you holding her tonight," she said, "I knew 2 things at once. That you had become exactly the kind of father I always thought you would be, and that I had no right to be standing there watching it like a stranger." Malcolm felt something shift in his chest then. Not forgiveness. Not yet. But the hard edges of his old story were no longer fitting together the way they had before. "You are a stranger," he said quietly. Danielle nodded, and that hurt more than if she had argued. "I know." The alley light buzzed above them. Somewhere behind the diner, someone laughed and slammed a car door. Danielle looked down at her hands, then back at him, and when she spoke again her voice had changed. Less guarded now. More dangerous because it was closer to true. "But I do not want to be Malcolm." Malcolm did not answer right away. The mist had turned colder, settling on the shoulders of his jacket and along the windshield of the car until the streetlights blurred into soft gold smears. He looked past Danielle for a moment, toward the mouth of the alley where the city kept moving without any interest in what two former spouses were trying to survive under retired security. Light. Then he looked back at her. Wanting something and being ready for it are not the same thing, he said. Danielle lowered her eyes, and the honesty in that small movement did more than tears would have done. I know, she said. I am not asking you to pretend nothing happened. Her fingers tightened around the folded cardigan. I am not even asking you to forgive me tonight. Malcolm leaned one shoulder against the side of the car. He was tired clear through to the bone, the kind of tired that came from years of carrying grocery bags, school forms, rent due dates, fevers at 2 a.m, and his own disappointment without letting any of it spill where his daughter could slip in it. Still, he stayed. That meant something. Danielle seemed to understand that, because she did not rush to fill the quiet. When she spoke again, her voice was softer, but not weaker. I left because everything in me felt broken, Malcolm. Not just sad. Not just overwhelmed. Broken in a way I did not know how to explain, without sounding like I had become someone neither of us would recognize. Malcolm's face did not change much, but something inside him sharpened. He had spent years building a version of that last winter from fragments. A slammed cabinet. Long silences. Bills on the counter. Danielle crying in the bathroom once and saying she was fine when she was not. The day she packed a duffel bag and said she needed space before either of them said something they could not take back. Space had turned into absence. Absence had turned into years. You let me think you just stopped caring, he said. Danielle's mouth trembled slightly, then steadied. I know. Do you? The words came out calm, but there was weight in them now. Do you know what that did? She nodded too quickly, then stopped herself, because some pain is too large for nodding. Probably not fully, she said. But I know enough to be sorry for the rest of my life. Malcolm looked down at the wet pavement. Water gathered along the curb and moved in thin streams toward the storm drain, quiet and relentless. Nia was 11 months old when you left, he said. She started walking 2 months later. Danielle closed her eyes. He kept going, not to punish her, but because truth that stays buried only turns heavier. Her first real word was not daddy. It was light. She used to point at the lamp in the living room every night and say it like she had discovered something holy. Danielle laughed once through a broken breath, and it nearly undid her. That sounds like her. Malcolm nodded. She hates peace. Loves thunderstorms if she is indoors and can count between lightning and thunder. She still sleeps with one sock off because she says both feet do not believe in blankets the same way. Danielle pressed a hand to her mouth. The alley stayed still around them. The light buzzed. Rain tapped from the fire escape in patient little drops. I missed all of it, she whispered. Malcolm did not soften the answer. Yeah. She looked at the car then, to the dim outline of Nia asleep in the back seat beneath the old blanket, and the grief on her face was so bare it almost felt private to witness. I used to tell myself she would be better off not seeing me fail in real time, Danielle said. I thought if I came back before I had anything solid, I would only confuse her, disappoint her, maybe even hurt her more. Malcolm let out a slow breath. So you disappeared instead. Danielle looked at him with no defense left. Yes. He nodded once. It was not agreement. It was acknowledgement. Sometimes the hardest thing was not hearing an excuse. It was hearing a reason that was broken enough to be true. Danielle stepped away from the wall, though only by an inch or two, as if the next thing needed to be said standing up straight. After I left, I went to stay with my cousin in Memphis. I thought it would be for 2 weeks. Then my mother got sick. Then I lost the office job I found because I kept missing shifts driving her to appointments. Then my cousin moved out of state, and I could not keep up with rent by myself. After that it felt like every month took something. She gave a small, humorless smile. First the apartment. Then the car. Then the idea that I was still the kind of woman who could walk back into your life and explain any of it with dignity. Malcolm listened without interrupting. He noticed the details. Again, the way she rubbed her thumb against the cuff of the cardigan. The way she kept lifting her chin after every hard sentence, not out of pride this time, but effort. Holding herself up one truth at a time. And now, he asked. Danielle looked at the diner door behind her. Now I rent a room from an older woman 3 blocks from here. I work 6 nights a week. I tell myself I am rebuilding. She swallowed. Some days I almost believe it. Malcolm studied her for a long second. There had been a time in his life when hearing all this would have triggered the need to solve it. to pick up extra shifts, to offer a couch, to take on one more burden and call it love. But fatherhood had taught him a better kind of strength, the kind that did not rush in and confuse rescue with healing. So when he finally spoke, his voice stayed level, almost gentle. Have you eaten dinner? Danielle blinked, clearly thrown by the question. What? Have you eaten? Her eyes searched his face, maybe looking for sarcasm, maybe for the old version of him that used kindness as a bandage over his own hurt. She found neither. No, she said quietly. Not yet. Malcolm reached into the front seat, grabbed the paper sack with the untouched grilled chicken sandwich he had ordered to go for later, and held it out to her. Take this. Danielle stared at the bag like it was too small to carry what it meant. Malcolm, take it. She did, slowly, with both hands. Warmth from the wrapped sandwich met the cold of her fingers, and for one suspended second the whole night narrowed to that exchange. No speeches, no grand repair. Just food passed from one tired person to another. Danielle looked down at the bag, then back up at him, and the shine in her eyes was not dramatic. It was worse than that. Human. You always do that, she whispered. Do what? You make room for people to be human before you make them explain themselves. Malcolm glanced toward the sleeping child in the back seat. Somebody did that for me once, he said. Danielle understood what he was not saying. It had been her. A long time ago. In a kitchen with cheap linoleum and too many overdue bills, she had once put a plate in front of him and said, You do not have to be strong every second, Malcolm. Tonight, under a buzzing alley light, the memory came back between them not as romance, but as evidence. They had once known how to care for each other when life was small enough to fit inside a room. Danielle held the sandwich against her chest like she had forgotten what it felt like to receive something without earning it first. I do not deserve this, she said. Malcolm's expression stayed quiet. Probably not. Her eyes widened slightly. Then he added, That is not why I gave it to you. And with that, something in Danielle finally gave way. Danielle did not sob. She did not fold in half or make the kind of sound movies like to use when a person finally reached the end of herself. What happened was quieter than that. More real. Her shoulders lost their fight. Her mouth opened once, then closed again. She looked down at the sandwich in her hands as if she had been given something much larger than food and did not know where to set it. When she finally spoke, her voice had changed. The careful waitress voice was gone. The practiced polite one too. What came out now was plain and tired and almost unbearably sincere. I used to think if I came back, I needed to come back fixed, she said. Malcolm stayed still, one hand resting on the roof of the car, the other in his pocket. He did not interrupt. Danielle gave a small shake of her head. I thought I needed a better job, better clothes, a place with a real couch and clean curtains and a refrigerator that did not hum all night like it was struggling to survive with me. Her laugh came out thin and brief. I thought if I showed up before any of that, you would look at me and only see what I had become. Malcolm looked at her for a long moment beneath the weak yellow light. And now, he asked. Danielle's eyes lifted slowly to his. Now I think maybe shame just kept changing its outfit and calling itself dignity. That sentence stayed between them for a second, simple and exact. Malcolm felt it land somewhere deep because he understood that kind of mistake. He had made his own versions of it over the years. Telling himself exhaustion was strength. Telling himself silence was peace. Telling himself moving on meant never looking back long enough to notice what had actually been lost. In the back seat, Nia shifted under the blanket and let out a sleepy little sigh. Both of them turned toward the sound at the same time. It was such a small thing, but it changed the air. They were not just two people standing in old regret anymore. There was a child sleeping 10 feet away, breathing evenly, carrying none of the blame and all of the consequence. Danielle looked at the car window dotted with mist and softened in a way Malcolm had not seen in years. Does she still like songs before bed? She asked, almost afraid of the answer. Malcolm nodded once. Every night. Danielle smiled then, not because she was happy, but because memory had found somewhere tender to sit. You used to sing off-key on purpose. I still do. I know. Malcolm looked at her. You do? Danielle nodded toward the car. She hummed while she colored. Same little turn in the melody you used to do before the last line. Malcolm had not noticed. That was the thing about fatherhood. You lived so close to a miracle you sometimes forgot to call it one. Danielle held the sandwich tighter, then lowered her gaze. I do not expect a place in her life because I showed up in an alley with a sad face and a true story, she said. I know that is not how trust works. Malcolm appreciated that more than he wanted to admit. No performance. No reaching for the easy absolution of motherhood by blood alone. Just honesty, standing in sensible shoes on wet concrete. Good, he said quietly. Because it is not. Danielle took the answer without flinching. I know. He watched her for another second, then asked the question that had been forming behind all the others. Does she know who you are? Danielle's hand froze around the paper bag. No, you never tried? She swallowed. I wrote letters. Malcolm's brow tightened just slightly. Letters. Danielle nodded. 5. Maybe 6. Her eyes flicked toward the diner door, then back. I never mailed them. I kept thinking the next one would explain it better. A beat. It never did. Malcolm looked at the wet ground. Then up again. Do you still have them? Danielle hesitated. Not because she wanted to lie. Because the truth sat somewhere vulnerable. Yes. Malcolm let that settle. Letters. Not excuses spoken into an empty room, but words she had actually tried to shape. Failed attempts still counted for something, even if they had never left her hands. Where, he asked. At my room. 3 blocks from here. She looked surprised that he remembered. Yes. The city murmured beyond the alley, distant and low, like another life being lived nearby. Malcolm glanced at the dashboard clock through the windshield. 9:12. Too late for long answers. Too early for the night to let go of them. Danielle followed his eyes and seemed to understand the math of it. A sleeping child. A workday tomorrow. Years of absence that could not be solved between a dumpster and a misting sky. I can go, she said softly, though the words cost her. I have already taken enough from this night. Malcolm looked at her, really looked. The tired blouse. The cheap cardigan. The face he had once memorized now worn into a different map by hardship and time. She looked breakable, yes, but also braver than she had earlier, because now she was standing without the protection of pretense. No, he said. Danielle stilled. No. Malcolm nodded toward the passenger seat of his car. Sit for a minute. Confusion crossed her face first, then caution. Malcolm, I do not want to make this harder. It is already hard. He opened the passenger door, reached in, and moved a stack of Nia's library books and a half-empty pack of fruit snacks onto the floorboard. Then he stepped back. Sit. Danielle looked at the open door as if it belonged to a world she had not been invited into in a long time. Inside the car, the dome light glowed soft and gold. A child's sweater hung from the headrest. There was a paper church program tucked in the console, 2 crayons in the cup holder, and 1 tiny sneaker under the front seat that Malcolm had apparently forgotten to wrestle back onto the proper foot earlier. It was not a fancy space. It was not even a particularly clean one. But it was lived in. Warm. Honest. Home on 4 wheels. Danielle stepped forward slowly and sat down. Careful. Almost reverent, like she did. Not want to disturb the life resting inside it. Malcolm closed the door after her, walked around to the driver's side, and got in. For a second, neither of them spoke. The windshield framed the alley in beads of rain. The heater clicked on with a tired groan. In the back seat, Nia slept on, one cheek pressed against the blanket, safe inside a world Malcolm had built one ordinary sacrifice at a time. Danielle stared ahead at the fogging glass and whispered, more to herself than to him. I forgot what it felt like to be somewhere gentle. Malcolm rested both hands on the steering wheel and looked out into the mist. That makes 2 of us, he said. Then, after a silence that felt less defensive than the ones before it, Danielle reached into her cardigan pocket and pulled out a folded envelope, so worn at the corners it looked as though it had been opened and closed 100 times. She held it in both hands for a moment before turning it over and placing it carefully on the center console between them. This is the first letter, she said. I wrote it the week after I left. Malcolm looked down at the envelope but did not touch it yet. On the front, in Danielle's handwriting, were 5 words that made the whole car feel smaller and deeper at once. For when you are ready. Malcolm did not reach for the envelope right away. He just looked at it there on the console, its edges softened by time, its white gone slightly yellow under the dome light, like the letter had been aging in silence all these years waiting for a courage neither of them had managed to find on time. Outside, the mist kept drifting across the windshield in thin silver threads, and the heater hummed low beneath the dashboard, filling the car with that dry, familiar warmth of old fabric paper napkins, and the faint vanilla scent of the air freshener Nia had insisted smelled like cupcakes even though it mostly smelled like plastic and memory. Danielle kept her hands folded in her lap now, empty except for the shape of restraint. She did not push the letter toward him again, did not explain it. She had finally learned that some truths lost dignity when they were chased. In the back seat, Nia shifted under the blanket and pressed one small palm against the window before settling again, still asleep, still unaware that the whole architecture of this night had changed around her. Malcolm let out a slow breath and picked up the envelope at last. It was lighter than it should have been. That was the strange thing about paper. A few ounces could carry years. He turned it over once, thumb brushing the flap, and asked without looking up, "Why this one?" Danielle stared through the windshield for a second before answering. "Because the first truth is usually the cleanest one," she said. "After that, people start decorating their pain so they can stand to look at it." Malcolm glanced at her then. It was a very Danielle sentence. Or maybe it was the version of Danielle life had carved down to what was essential. He slipped one finger beneath the unsealed flap and unfolded the letter carefully, mindful of the soft crackle at the creases. The handwriting was hers. He knew it before he saw the first full line. Slight right slant. Tight loops. The kind of penmanship that always looked like it was trying to stay composed for both of them. He read in silence. "Malcolm, if you are reading this, then I managed to become braver than I was the day I left. Right now, I am riding from a bus station with a paper cup of coffee I cannot afford and a suitcase that still has one of your old shirts in it, because I could not bear to leave everything behind at once. I told myself I needed air, but the truth is uglier than that. I am ashamed of how much I am falling apart. I do not know how to be your wife while I feel this lost. I do not know how to be Nia's mother while I keep waking up with the kind of sadness that makes brushing my teeth feel like a negotiation. You did not fail me. That is the part one need you to know even if it never reaches you. You did not fail me. I am the one who stopped knowing how to stand inside the life we built without feeling like I was breaking it by touching it. I loved you this morning. I loved you when I packed. I love you now. That is what makes this so hard to admit. Love is here. I just am not." Malcolm stopped there, not because the letter had ended, but because the words had reached somewhere in him that still remembered the sound of packing tape in their apartment, the heavy stillness of that winter morning, the crib in the next room, the sink full of bottles, the sound of Danielle moving through the bedroom, not like someone leaving for an afternoon, but like someone trying to step outside her own skin. He lowered the paper slightly and stared through the windshield without really seeing the alley anymore. Danielle sat very still beside him, giving him the rare mercy of not watching his face while he read what she had once been too afraid to send. Finally he asked, "How long were you at that bus station?" Danielle swallowed. 6 hours. "Did you want me to come after you?" The question came out quieter than the silence around it. Danielle pressed her lips together before answering. "Yes." Then, after a beat, and no. Malcolm nodded once, because he understood contradictions better now than he used to. Raising a child alone had taught him that the heart could carry opposite things without lying about either. Danielle looked down at her hands. "I kept thinking if I mailed it, you would come find me." "I would have. I know." Malcolm folded the letter back along its old lines with more care than anger would have managed. "Then why didn't you?" Danielle's eyes filled again, but her voice stayed steady. "Because I was not sure whether I wanted to be found or forgiven, and I did not think I deserved either one." Malcolm rested the folded paper on his knee. In the back seat, Nia made a small sleepy sound and tugged the blanket closer to her chin without waking. That tiny movement pulled both of them back into the same present. Not the bus station. Not the apartment with the cracked tile. Here. This car. This child. This night asking what kind of truth could still be useful after damage had already done its work. Malcolm looked over his shoulder at Nia for a second, then back at the letter, then at Danielle. "She is going to ask about you," he said. Danielle straightened a little, startled by the shift. "I know. Not tonight. Maybe not tomorrow. But she will." Danielle nodded, and this time fear was not the only thing in her face. There was longing there too, raw and disciplined, like she was trying to hold hope by the edges so it would not cut anybody. "When she does," Malcolm went on, "I am not going to lie to her." Danielle's breath caught. "Okay. But I am not going to hand her a story I do not understand either." He looked down at the remaining pages in the envelope. So if there is more truth than this, I need all of it. Not the polished version. Not the one that protects your pride. The whole thing. Danielle turned toward him fully now, cardigan slipping from one shoulder, eyes tired and clear in the soft light. There is more, she said. Malcolm held her gaze. I figured. Danielle looked at the envelope, then toward the narrow street beyond the windshield where the mist had begun to lift just enough to show the outlines of parked cars and dark storefronts. The second letter explains some of it, she said. The third explains why I never sent the first two. Her fingers tightened slowly around each other in her lap. But the last one. She stopped there. Malcolm waited. The last one is the truth I could not even write until this year. The car seemed to quiet around that sentence. Even the heater felt softer. Malcolm watched her closely now, not with suspicion exactly, but with the stillness of a man who had learned that life-changing things rarely announce themselves with noise. What truth? He asked. Danielle's eyes moved to the back seat, to the sleeping child whose existence had held him together and exposed every fracture at the same time. When she looked back at Malcolm, her voice was almost a whisper. The reason I left was not only grief, or shame, or money. Her throat worked once. It was also because, the week before I went, the doctor told me something about Nia. Something I was too afraid to say out loud because I thought if I named it, I would lose both of you for good. Malcolm did not move. The folded letter stayed in his hand. Outside, a car passed at the end of the block, headlights sweeping briefly across the alley before disappearing into the wet dark. Inside the sedan, under the low golden dome light, in the hush of one sleeping child, the past opened one more inch. And this time, it was no longer asking to be remembered. It was asking to be faced.